If Putin does manage to shred the old order, will strongman politics rise from these ruins? And will it be Russia, China, or both? For that, I turn to former Foreign Ministry official Victor Gao in Beijing. Victor Gao, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So I just want to ask whether at the end of the third week of this war, you can describe China's precise position, because it has been walking a tightrope, certainly in public. Is China for this invasion? Does it call it a war? Is it helping Moscow? What is its position right now?
First of all, whatever that is happening in Ukraine right now, by whatever name you call it, a war or military conflict or special military operations, is causing a lot of damage and loss of human life. China is pained by what's going on in Ukraine. Why? Because China has very good relations with Ukraine on the one hand, and also with Russia on the other hand. And from the very beginning of the outstart of this military operation or war in Ukraine, China has called on all parties to de-escalate and bring the war to an end as quickly as possible to save as many lives as possible. China has also provided humanitarian assistance to Ukrainian refugees and is opening its door very wide to accommodate as many Ukrainian people to China as possible. And China has a very rare opportunity to play the role of a mediator if all parties involved would require such service from China.
So that is very interesting. Look, I hear you distinctly using the word war, and it's similar to what your president used in his conference with Presidents Macron and Chancellor Scholz. And it's a little different still to what the Chinese state media is calling it. But I hear you officials calling it a war. And the ambassador to the US, your ambassador to the US, has just written an op-ed dispelling rumors, quote, that China knew about, acquiesced to, or tacitly supported the war. And as you know, there are rumors that President Xi asked President Putin to delay the invasion until after the games. Then there are accusations by the United States that Putin has asked President Xi for military and economic help. I know your side denies it. Where are we on that?
Thank you very much, Christian. You are raising several very important questions. First of all, what China promoted before the Winter Olympics was a resolution by the United Nations calling for a ceasefire during the Beijing Winter Olympics. And almost 200 countries signed off to that declaration. That doesn't mean that China stands for any country to engage in a war or military operation after the end of the Beijing Winter Olympics. I don't think anyone should stretch its imagination in that way. China wanted to have peace rather than instigating any war. Now, secondly, Russia, as far as I understand, has the most powerful military forces in the world with very lethal and sophisticated weapons. It would be very surprising if Russia would need any help from China in terms of military assistance. This speculation is completely speculative and unfounded. Now, China's government has already made it very clear that if China had known about Russia's intention to launch the military operation in Ukraine later, the Chinese leader would have tried his best to prevent this from happening. So I think China's position is very clear.
Okay, let's just put it into context. You said Russia is the most powerful military. Well, it's not as powerful as yours, and it's not as powerful as the United States. So it's one of the most powerful militaries. So now let me ask you this. China clearly must be worried that any perception of tilting to or doing business with Russia at this particular moment where there's global sanctions. I want to just play this soundbite by the spokeswoman for the Biden administration about what might happen to China if indeed there's any connection economically with Russia at this time. Here we go.
if China were to decide to be an economic provider or to take additional steps there to Russia, they only make up 15% or 15 to 20% of the world's economy. The G7 countries make up more than 50%. So there are a range of tools at our disposal in coordination with our European partners, should we need to use them.
So, Victor Gao, she's basically, alluding to possible sanctions, secondary sanctions and the like against China. Is that a price China is willing to pay for backing up what President Xi called his friend with no limits, President Putin?
First of all, I think Ms. Saki's estimation or numbers are not accurate. China now accounts for about 18% of the total economy in the world. Secondly, allow me to remind all of us that China, Russia normalized their relations back in 1989, before the collapse of the former Soviet Union. It is already 33 years. And over these 3 decades, China and Russia have been respecting each other. The two peoples have dwelt with each other with equality, with mutual respect. And China-Russian trade has been in the range of more than 180 billion US dollars. It's all comprehensive. It covers a whole range of things. How could anyone in the world today expect that they could bring this China-Russian trade to a halt? No, this is not the right thing to do. How can anyone expect that they can disrupt the people-to-people exchanges between China and Russia today? No, this is really not the right thing to do. Don't sabotage international trade by sanctioning China, especially because China has now the rare asset of having good channels of communication with Russia on the one hand and with Ukraine on the other hand. And China does not have a vested interest at all in the outcome of this war. China is on the side of peace rather than having a vested interest in promoting war in Ukraine.
Okay, we're not talking about promoting war, but the vested interest must be in picking up the pieces from this war, given that the world order, as we know it, has been torn to shreds by Vladimir Putin invading another country and settling or trying to settle a political dispute through blood and force and against international law. But I'm absolutely fascinated first about the economy. You mentioned how much trade you do with Russia. You do 10 times as much with the West, if you include the United States and the EU. This is what the president of Finland told me just this week, that even if governments don't sanction China, any perception of enabling Putin's war could lead to behavioral sanctions against China, cancelling, so to speak. Let me play what he told me.
Ordinary people make sanctions too. And the Chinese reputation image is not that very good in Europe at the moment amongst ordinary people, consumers, for example. And if they start to think that China is, not doing its best to stop killing, that might increase that feeling.
How do you react to that? You know what he's saying, right? I mean, the people will decide whether to buy your products or not.
First of all, I'm disappointed by what the president has to say about China's position. Now, allow me to emphasize, to prevent killing requires diplomacy and dialogue and negotiation at the highest level, rather than imposing sanctions. It is truly a very important point that imposing sanctions will not solve the problem. It may just drive Russia more and more into a corner with dire consequences for global peace and stability. Don't forget, Russia has the largest and most lethal nuclear arsenal, larger than that of the United States. How can anyone expect that there will be lasting peace in the world by excluding Russia? This is the time to use the greatest amount of wisdom and vision and courage to engage with Russia so that they will do their best to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. And eventually, only peace and negotiation and diplomacy can achieve that goal. This is the best way to stop killing in Ukraine.
Victor Gao, in terms of the bigger picture now, it's obviously a battle on the ground of Ukraine, for which world values will emerge intact or in the lead or whatever. So far, since World War II, as you know, it's been an American-led liberal world order. This may change now. I've heard it said that China, President Xi, believes that both Russia and the United States are basically two tired global powers. So how do you think China will be able to position itself to take advantage of this gap now, or potential opening as leader of the new world order? Do you think China wants that position?
Well, first of all, I think you are raising a very important question. Purely from the Chinese perspective, allow me to emphasize one point, that the world order we are living through was created at the end of the Second World War. And the former Soviet Union, China, the United States and the United Kingdom, etc., made huge contribution to the creation of the international world order that we are now living through. China wants to defend the international world order as we understand it. China does not want to rock the boat. China has no wedge to throw into the international world order. China wants to have a multilateral world with the United Nations at the very center, rather than a world order to be dictated and dominated by any one single power. This is the world order that China wants to embrace and encourage. This is in protection of the international security order left over, created by the end of the Second World War. We all need to treasure this. No one should create a world order to be dictated by any one single country. This is multilateralism. China stands for multilateralism with the United Nations at the very center of that.
It must be in China's interest right now to do much more diplomatically. Clearly, it's seen the very thing that it didn't want to see. Putin's actions has galvanized the West, and you've heard all the countries pledge to up their military spending. That will affect, how they deal with China and what forces are deployed, especially in the Pacific, etc. That must be a worry for Beijing.
Yes and no. Christian, allow me to emphasize one point. Right now, while the war or the military operations are creating havoc in Ukraine, which is a tragedy, we need to have the courage to look beyond the horizon, and we need to prepare for the time when the dust will need to settle in Ukraine. Allow me to emphasize that there will be no lasting and sustainable security framework for Europe if Russia is excluded. There will be no sustainable and lasting peace in the world if Russia will be excluded. Whether you like Russia or not, that's another issue. But simply you cannot exclude the largest country with more than 17 million square kilometers of land mass and the most important, if not one of the most important, nuclear arsenals in the world. Whether you like Russia or not, eventually you need to re-engage with Russia. And China wants to see an international framework where all these countries will be very much included rather than any one or any number of countries to be excluded from the international order. There will be no lasting peace in Europe if anyone wants to exclude Russia.
Well, a Russia that plays by international rules, for sure, and the Russian people, obviously, for sure. Victor Gao, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective from Beijing.
Thank you very much for having me, Christian.